Racist cop accuses black woman on board only to face her shadow squad stationed 2 rows behind him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Alexis Turner sat calmly in her seat on Apex Wings Flight 762, a routine business trip from New York to Los Angeles. The flight was smooth, the first-class cabin quiet, with only the hum of the engines filling the background. Alexis, dressed in a sharp navy blazer and tailored trousers, looked every bit the part of a successful professional. She kept her head down, flipping through a report on her tablet, but her sharp eyes were always alert. She was used to the whispers that surrounded her, the occasional sideways glance from passengers who didn't expect to see a woman like her in first class. But Alexis wasn't just anyone. She was an undercover FBI agent on a mission, but that mission had to remain a secret for now. As the plane cruised at 35,000 feet, the peace of the cabin was broken by a loud voice. "Excuse me, miss." Officer James Carter's voice echoed across the aisles as he approached Alexis' seat. His tone was authoritative, laced with a hint of suspicion. "I need you to step out into the aisle for a moment." Alexis glanced up, her eyes briefly meeting his. She felt the sudden shift in the air, the subtle tension that only a seasoned investigator could detect. It was clear this wasn't a simple matter. "What's the issue, officer?" she asked, her voice calm, but with an edge that suggested she knew what was coming. "You've been acting suspiciously," Officer Carter replied, his eyes scanning her with barely concealed judgment. "I'm going to need to see your ID." Alexis didn't flinch. She was no stranger to being watched. But she didn't like the way this officer's eyes lingered on her, his suspicion clearly based on nothing more than her appearance. As she reached into her bag to retrieve her identification, she could feel the weight of the other passengers' gazes. Some were already whispering among themselves, casting furtive glances toward her and the officer. The tension was palpable, and Alexis was more than aware of it. She handed him her ID, watching as he studied it for a moment too long. He didn't seem convinced. "This doesn't look right. I'm going to have to search your bag," he said, his voice growing more insistent. Alexis remained calm, her hands steady as she clasped her bag tighter. She knew this was just the beginning. What Officer Carter didn't know was that he had just picked the wrong person to mess with. Alexis was no ordinary passenger. She had a team stationed on this very flight, and they were closer than he realized. 2 rows behind him, her shadow squad, a group of highly trained FBI agents, was waiting for the right moment. They were here for more than just a routine flight. They were here for justice. As Officer Carter reached for her bag, Alexis's eyes flickered briefly to the rear of the cabin. A subtle signal passed between her and her team, and just like that, the tables began to turn. She knew it wouldn't be long before Officer Carter realized that he was the one being watched now. As Officer James Carter reached for Alexis Turner's bag, a subtle shift in the atmosphere rippled through the cabin. He was so focused on his suspicion, so sure of his judgment, that he failed to notice the stillness behind him. Alexis's hand remained on her bag, steady, calm, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the situation, waiting for the right moment. The rest of the passengers watched in silence, their uneasy glances darting between the officer and the woman sitting quietly, their whispers almost drowned out by the hum of the plane. For Alexis, this was just another day in her work, but to Carter, it was about to become his worst mistake. Alexis was no ordinary traveler. She was a federal agent, and the people around her were more than just fellow passengers. They were her team, the shadow squad that had been watching from 2 rows behind him. As Carter continued his unjust search, Alexis's calm demeanor never faltered. She had been in tense situations before, but this was different. She wasn't just facing a misjudgment. She was up against the kind of systemic bias that had tainted too many interactions before. The moment grew heavier with each passing second. The passengers' whispers grew louder, their murmurs of confusion mixed with disapproval. But still, Carter pressed on, determined to assert his authority over someone he perceived as an inconvenience. "This is taking too long," he muttered to himself, a flash of impatience in his voice. Alexis said nothing, her face betraying no emotion. She knew what was coming. She had dealt with this before. As she prepared herself for the inevitable moment, her hand subtly moved to signal her team. In the blink of an eye, the atmosphere shifted again. The two agents in the rear of the cabin stood, moving swiftly but discreetly toward the front. A quiet shift, unnoticed by the officer but felt by everyone else. Officer Carter finally looked down at the bag in his hands, as if to inspect it further. But when he looked up, ready to make his next demand, his gaze met something far different than what he expected. There, standing directly in front of him, was a towering figure, a federal agent, her badge gleaming in the dim light of the cabin. "I think it's time you stop, officer." Alexis's voice broke the silence, calm yet full of authority. Carter froze. His mind raced, but he couldn't piece together what was happening. Alexis straightened in her seat, the quiet, unassuming woman she had been moments before now revealed in her true form. She wasn't just any passenger, nor was she just a woman fighting back against prejudice. She was Alexis Turner, FBI agent, and the moment she revealed her identity, the entire dynamic of the flight changed. Her team, her shadow squad, had already surrounded him, their eyes locked on Carter with the same calm authority that Alexis had just demonstrated. Carter's hand faltered, his earlier bravado crumbling as he realized the woman he had accosted wasn't just another suspect, she was a superior. "I'm afraid you've made a mistake, officer," Alexis continued, her voice firm but not unkind. Carter's face reddened as he processed the situation. The realization hit him like a wave. The tables had turned in a split second. The whispers around the cabin grew louder, now mixed with disbelief. The power dynamics that had once seemed so certain were unraveling before him. As the agents moved closer, their presence became undeniable. Carter, caught in the web of his own misjudgment, now faced the consequences of his actions. Alexis watched him with calm eyes, knowing that this moment wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. "You'll be hearing from our department," one of the agents said, their voice steady as they moved past Carter to stand at Alexis's side. Carter stood motionless, his earlier confidence shattered, his body rigid with embarrassment. Alexis's squad had done their job well, and in just a few short moments, the entire cabin had witnessed the power of accountability and the consequence of unchecked bias. The realization settled over the passengers like a weight, but for Alexis, it was just another day. She had known this was coming, and now it was over. The officers responsible for this moment would soon answer for their actions, and in the end, justice had prevailed. As the plane continued its flight towards Los Angeles, the atmosphere in the cabin was a stark contrast to the tense situation moments earlier. The passengers, still processing what had just happened, whispered among themselves, some in disbelief, others in awe of how Alexis Turner had handled the situation. Officer James Carter, standing near the front, was visibly shaken, his face a deep shade of red, his posture stiff as he tried to regain his composure. Alexis, now fully in control of the situation, leaned back in her seat, her expression calm, her mind already returning to the task at hand. She had no intention of letting this disruption derail her mission. She was a professional, after all, and her focus remained sharp. As the other agents took their positions in the cabin, ensuring everything was under control, Alexis looked out the window, her thoughts drifting for a moment. She thought about the years of training, the countless hours spent preparing for moments like this. It wasn't just about the work she did. It was about ensuring that justice was served, no matter the odds. Alexis was well aware of the challenges she faced as a black woman in a field dominated by systemic bias. But she had never let that stop her. Instead, it fueled her determination to succeed, to fight for what was right, to show that people like her could not be overlooked. Her mind shifted back to the task at hand. This flight was not just a routine trip, it was part of an undercover operation, one that had been meticulously planned. Alexis had been gathering intelligence for months, piecing together a network of corrupt officials, and now she was closer than ever to uncovering the truth. The incident with Officer Carter, though unsettling, had only served to reinforce her resolve. It was a reminder of why she did what she did, because there were still people out there who needed to be held accountable. Her squad, though silent, had played their part expertly, ensuring that the officers' actions did not go unchecked. The timing of their intervention was perfect, a seamless operation that had left Carter and the rest of the passengers with no room to question Alexis's authority. As the plane continued its journey, Alexis felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that justice was once again on the right side. But she also knew this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight. But she was ready. As the flight attendants moved through the cabin, offering drinks and snacks, Alexis sat quietly, her mind still sharp. She glanced over at the agents seated across from her, their eyes meeting for just a moment. No words were exchanged, but there was an understanding. They had done what needed to be done. The passengers, now settling into a more relaxed atmosphere, no longer whispered about the confrontation. Instead, they went about their business, returning to their own personal worlds. But Alexis knew this moment would stay with them. It would serve as a reminder that justice had a way of prevailing, even when it seemed out of reach. And as the plane began its descent toward Los Angeles, Alexis felt a renewed sense of purpose. The mission was far from over, but she was closer than ever to uncovering the truth. She would not rest until the corrupt were held accountable, and until justice was truly served. As the plane touched down in Los Angeles, Alexis Turner remained composed, her face still calm, but her mind was far from the peace that surrounded her. The wheels of the aircraft screeched as they met the runway, signaling the end of this chapter of the mission. Her team had completed their task flawlessly, but she knew that this was only the beginning. The real work would start now. As the passengers began to gather their things, the usual bustle of deboarding filled the air. Alexis stood up slowly, adjusting her blazer and smoothing out any wrinkles. She felt a tap on her shoulder and turned to face one of the agents from her team, who gave her a subtle nod of approval. No words were needed. They all knew their roles. As Alexis made her way off the plane, she noticed Officer Carter standing near the gate, his eyes still filled with the shock of what had just transpired. He was trying to avoid eye contact with her, and Alexis couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. He had learned his lesson, but in her line of work, there was no time for personal triumphs. The mission came first. Stepping into the terminal, Alexis moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of danger. Her instincts were finely tuned from years of training, and a sense of urgency in the air told her that things weren't over yet. She had an appointment to keep. The mission wasn't about exposing one corrupt officer. It was about uncovering a much larger network, one that had infiltrated positions of power across the city. Alexis had known from the start that this would be a delicate operation. The flight had been only one piece of a much larger puzzle. She couldn't afford to let the incident with Carter distract her. As she walked toward the exit, Alexis's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from one of her contacts. The meeting location has been compromised. Get to the safe house now. Her heart rate picked up, but her face remained neutral. This was the kind of news that could turn a good day into a bad one in an instant. Without wasting a moment, she turned on her heel and made her way toward the underground parking garage. She had to get to the safe house before it was too late. The sound of her heels echoed in the empty hallway, and with each step, her mind raced through the logistics of what needed to happen next. She needed to meet with her team, regroup, and strategize. Alexis knew that her enemies were watching, waiting for any opportunity to strike. This wasn't the first time she had been in danger, and it wouldn't be the last. As she approached her car, she noticed two figures standing by. Their eyes locked on her every move. Alexis didn't break her stride, her hand instinctively resting on the side of her jacket where her firearm was holstered. She wasn't concerned. She was prepared. The figures turned away just as she reached her car, but she didn't take her eyes off them. She could feel the tension in the air, but she refused to show any signs of weakness. Alexis opened the door and slid into the driver's seat, starting the engine with a low hum. As she drove away from the airport, she kept her eyes on the rearview mirror. She knew she was being followed, but it didn't matter. She was always 2 steps ahead. The road ahead was dark, but for Alexis Turner, the light of justice always shone brightest when the world was at its darkest. As Alexis Turner drove through the quiet streets of Los Angeles, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. She had just left the airport, narrowly avoiding the eyes of those who were following her, but she knew it wasn't over. The message from her contact still echoed in her mind. The meeting location has been compromised. Get to the safe house now. The urgency was clear. Her grip tightened on the steering wheel, her eyes scanning the road ahead. She had to remain calm. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She knew every twist and turn in this city like the back of her hand. Still, tonight, the city felt different. The usual hum of traffic and the distant city lights were replaced by an eerie silence, and the weight of what was at stake pressed down on her shoulders. Alexis had spent years working undercover, building a network of informants, piecing together fragments of information, but now it felt as if the entire operation was on the brink of unraveling. As she neared an intersection, she noticed a car tailing her, not too close, but close enough to make her uneasy. She wasn't surprised. In her line of work, being followed came with the territory. What mattered now was how she handled it. She made a sharp turn onto a side street, watching the car behind her do the same. Alexis's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. The car was still there, a dark silhouette in the dim light. She knew the next few minutes were crucial. If she could lose them, she would have the upper hand. If not, she would have to rely on her training and hope that her team was ready. Alexis took another turn, this one sharper than the last, heading toward a narrow alley that cut through the heart of the city's industrial district. The alley was a quiet, hidden space, lined with old warehouses and broken-down buildings. The perfect place to shake off a tail. She drove faster, her foot pressing down on the accelerator, her mind focused entirely on the task at hand. The sound of her tires on the asphalt grew louder as she sped down the alley, the shadows of the buildings around her growing longer, more ominous. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, her heartbeat quickening. It was now or never. As she reached the end of the alley, Alexis made a sharp right turn into an underground parking structure. The concrete walls echoed with the sound of her car's engine as she raced toward a spot in the back. She parked quickly, cutting the engine and sitting still for a moment, her eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. She waited. The car that had been following her did not appear behind her. Alexis let out a quiet sigh of relief. For now, she had lost them, but she knew the danger wasn't over. Her team was waiting for her at the safe house, and she needed to regroup. The operation had to continue. Alexis grabbed her phone and checked the message again. Meet at the safe house. Now, there was no time to waste. She reached into the back seat, grabbed her bag, and stepped out of the car. The cold night air hit her as she walked toward the entrance of the parking structure. Every step was deliberate, each one taking her closer to the next phase of her mission. Alexis's focus never wavered. She had one goal: uncover the truth. And nothing, not even a close call with a tail, would stop her from seeing it through. As Alexis Turner entered the underground safe house, she felt the weight of the night's events settle on her shoulders. The familiar scent of concrete and metal filled the air as she stepped into the dimly lit hallway. Her team was already waiting. Their expressions were focused, each of them understanding the gravity of what was at stake. There was no time for pleasantries, no time for hesitation. Alexis walked toward the briefing room, her footsteps echoing softly on the cold floor. As she entered the room, she was greeted with the calm, collected faces of her team members, but there was a quiet intensity in their eyes. They knew that the operation had taken a dangerous turn. "What's the status?" Alexis asked, her voice steady. One of the agents, a tall man named Marcus, looked up from the table where a map of the city was spread out. "We've identified a potential leak," he said, pointing to a spot on the map. "The information about our meeting location got out, but we're still tracing the source. Alexis's eyes narrowed. She had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed only solidified her concerns. A leak in her operation could jeopardize everything. "How close are we to the next move?" she asked, turning her attention to the rest of the team. Another agent, Jessica, spoke up. "We're ready to move on the next target. But with the leak, we need to proceed carefully. We can't afford another slip-up." Alexis took a deep breath, absorbing the information. Every decision from here on out would need to be calculated. She had worked too hard to let this operation fall apart now. "I want constant surveillance on our lead target. Make sure there are no more surprises," Alexis ordered. "And, Jessica, I need you to monitor the communications. If anyone tries to make contact, I want to know about it immediately." Jessica nodded, already pulling up her laptop to begin tracking the flow of information. Alexis turned to Marcus. "How are the other agents handling the perimeter?" Marcus glanced at his watch. "They're securing the location as we speak. The safe house is locked down tight. No one's getting in or out without us knowing." Alexis nodded in approval. The safe house was secure, but that didn't mean they were safe. The clock was ticking, and time was running out. Alexis looked at her team, the weight of leadership pressing down on her, but she didn't show it. "Let's move fast," she said. "We're not going to let anyone take us off course." "Not now." The team sprang into action, each person taking their place. Alexis lingered for a moment, watching them work with the precision she had come to expect from the best. But even as they set their plans in motion, Alexis couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was already one step ahead of them. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from an anonymous contact. "You're being watched. Trust no one." The message sent a chill down her spine. Alexis turned to face her team. "We have a bigger problem than we thought," she said, her voice steady, though her mind raced with the implications of the message. It wasn't just about a leak anymore. They were being hunted, and Alexis Turner was ready for whatever came next. The message on Alexis's phone lingered in her mind. "You're being watched. Trust no one." The weight of it pressed down on her chest as she stared at the screen, her fingers gripping the phone tighter. She looked up at her team, who were busy analyzing the information they had gathered. A part of her wanted to dismiss the message as a random threat, but deep down, she knew better. The tension in the room was palpable, and she could feel it tightening around her like a vice. "We need to move fast," she said, her voice cutting through the air, steady yet urgent. Her team looked up, aware that the situation had escalated. They had come this far, but now there were unknown forces working against them. Alexis's mind raced, but she forced herself to remain calm. "We can't afford to make any mistakes now," she continued, her eyes meeting each agent's gaze. "The information we've gathered is too valuable. We have to stay ahead of them, no matter what." Marcus, standing to her left, nodded. "We're already on it. We've traced a few of their communications. Whoever's behind this is moving quickly, but we're getting closer." Alexis turned her attention to Jessica, who was sitting in front of a series of monitors, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "What's the status on our lead?" Alexis asked. Jessica paused, scanning the screen, then glanced up. "We've identified a location. It's an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The intel suggests it's a staging area for their operations." Alexis felt a surge of determination. This was it, the break they needed. "We move in 30 minutes, she said, her voice leaving no room for hesitation. "Get the gear ready. Everyone knows their role." The team jumped into action. Alexis watched as they swiftly prepared, each agent moving with practiced precision. But as she watched them work, a nagging feeling tugged at her. The message from the anonymous contact kept playing in her mind. Who could she trust? Was there a mole within her own team? She couldn't afford any distractions, but she also couldn't ignore the possibility that someone, was working against them from the inside. Alexis took a deep breath and pushed the thought aside. There would be time for that later. Right now, her focus had to be on the mission. The operation was bigger than any one person, and she couldn't afford to let doubt cloud her judgment. As she strapped on her gear, the minutes ticked away, each second bringing them closer to the warehouse. The plan was simple, Get in, gather intel, and get out. But Alexis knew from experience that the simplest plans often went sideways the fastest. She couldn't afford to underestimate what they were up against. The team was ready, and as they gathered in the briefing room, Alexis gave them a final look. "Remember, this is not just about us," she said. "It's about everything we've worked for. Let's finish this." The room was silent for a moment before they all nodded in unison. Alexis felt a flicker of pride. They had been through so much together, and now they were about to face the unknown once again. She turned and led the team out, the weight of the unknown pressing on her shoulders, but her resolve unwavering. The operation had already begun, and she wasn't going to stop until the truth came to light. The team moved swiftly through the night, the warehouse looming ahead of them like a silent fortress. Alexis Turner led the way, her every sense on high alert. They had arrived without incident, but she knew better than to assume it would stay that way. The streets had been empty as they drove in, the usual noise of the city muted by the late hour. The warehouse itself sat on the outskirts of Los Angeles, isolated and tucked away from prying eyes. It was exactly the kind of place where secrets were kept, and Alexis couldn't shake the feeling that everything they had worked for had led them to this very spot. The wind whispered through the cracked windows of the van as they parked just out of sight. Alexis's gaze never wavered from the building in front of her as she prepared her team for what was to come. "We go in quiet," she said, her voice low but firm. "No unnecessary risks. We're in and out. Stick to the plan." The agents nodded, each one equipped and ready for action. The mission had reached its critical point, and there was no room for error. They couldn't afford to leave anything to chance. Alexis felt a momentary pang of doubt, but she pushed it aside. It wasn't the first time she had been in a situation like this. It was a feeling she had learned to ignore, because no matter how many times she had faced it, there was always something new at stake. She adjusted her gear and gave the signal. They moved like shadows, slipping through the cracks in the building's exterior, using the darkness to their advantage. The night air was cool, a sharp contrast to the tense heat that burned inside her chest. As they neared the entrance, Alexis could hear the faint sound of voices inside. Low murmurs, like a meeting in progress. She motioned for her team to halt, her ear pressed against the cold metal door. She didn't need to hear more. The intel was right. They were in the right place. But this was no longer just about the information they were after. It was about exposing the network that had been hiding in plain sight for too long. Alexis's heart raced as she signaled the next move. The team slipped inside through a side entrance, their footsteps muffled by the thick concrete floors. Alexis led them through the labyrinth of rooms, each corner bringing them closer to their objective. The air was thick with anticipation, and Alexis could feel the weight of every step they took. She had come too far to back down now. They reached a set of steel doors, and Alexis motioned for the team to halt once again. This was it, the final hurdle. Behind those doors was everything they had been working toward. Alexis's fingers tightened around the handle of her weapon as she prepared for the confrontation she knew was inevitable. The door creaked open, revealing a large, dimly lit room. In the center, several individuals sat around a table, their voices hushed as they went over papers and files. The room smelled faintly of stale air, a place in use to visitors. Alexis stepped forward, the team following close behind her. It was time to act. The moment the intruders were spotted, all semblances of secrecy vanished. "Federal agents, don't move." Alexis's voice rang out, cutting through the stillness of the room. The individuals at the table froze, their eyes wide with shock. Alexis didn't wait for them to process what was happening. She stepped forward, her agents quickly surrounding the room. They had the upper hand now, but Alexis couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The air felt too still, too quiet. As she scanned the room, her eyes caught the glint of a hidden camera, and she knew this was just the beginning of a much larger game. Someone was always watching. Alexis's resolve hardened. She wasn't leaving until she had the answers she needed. The truth was within her reach, and nothing was going to stop her from uncovering it. As the last of the individuals in the room was handcuffed and led out by Alexis's team, a cold realization settled in her gut. The room, once filled with the quiet murmur of conspiracy, was now eerily silent. The faces of the operatives, once so confident, now showed fear and confusion. Alexis knew this was a victory, but it didn't feel like one yet. She had her targets, the evidence was in hand, but something was off. The sudden shift in the air, the quiet clicking of the handcuffs, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. All of it seemed too easy. They had anticipated resistance, a fight, but the room had surrendered without a struggle. She scanned the faces of her team, and they, too, looked uncertain. Marcus, who had been with her through countless operations, met her gaze with a furrowed brow. "What's going on, Alexis?" he asked, his voice low. Alexis didn't respond immediately. She was thinking, piecing together the fragments in her mind. Everything pointed to this moment being a success, yet she felt a strange unease. This wasn't the way things were supposed to go. She had come in expecting a battle, but instead, they had walked into an empty trap. A part of her wanted to feel relief, to breathe easy knowing the operation was nearing its end, but there was no satisfaction in it. "This doesn't feel right," she finally said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "There has to be more to this." The door behind her creaked open, and her heart skipped a beat. She spun around, instinctively reaching for her weapon, but it wasn't needed. It was only Jessica, her trusted agent, who had stayed back to monitor the building's exterior. She stepped into the room, her face grim. "Alexis, we've got a problem," she said, her tone urgent. Alexis's stomach dropped. She knew this wasn't the casual update Jessica usually brought. "What's happened?" she asked. Jessica hesitated for a moment before answering. "We've been compromised. Someone knew we were coming. It's all over the news already. We're not the only ones who know about this operation." Alexis felt the weight of the news hit her like a physical blow. It wasn't just a minor leak. They had been completely exposed. Her mind raced as she processed the implications. This wasn't just a tactical setback. It was a blow to everything they had built. Their cover, their secrecy, everything was compromised. Alexis's jaw clenched, her thoughts spinning. "Who?" she demanded, her voice tight. "Who leaked it?" Jessica shook her head. "We don't know yet. We're still tracing the source. But someone inside has to be feeding them information." Alexis's hands curled into fists. Her team had been betrayed, and the stakes had just been raised exponentially. She could already hear the sound of sirens in the distance, the inevitable result of the breach. The calm of the moment was slipping away, replaced by the urgent need to act. "Get the remaining agents to the van," Alexis said, her voice calm but commanding. "We need to leave now. The longer we stay here, the more exposed we are." The team moved quickly, but Alexis's thoughts remained with the betrayal. How had they been discovered? Was there someone within her team she couldn't trust? No, she thought. It couldn't be. She had known these agents for years, fought beside them, trusted them with her life. And yet, the doubt gnawed at her. They had been careful, meticulous in their planning, but now that was all irrelevant. As she led the team toward the exit, Alexis kept her eyes scanning the shadows, always alert. She had trained for moments like this, but nothing could prepare her for the feeling of betrayal, especially when it came from within. The team filed out of the building, moving quickly but with purpose. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the dark, and Alexis's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't sure who she could trust anymore, but she knew one thing for sure. She was going to find out. The mission wasn't over, not by a long shot. The game had changed, and Alexis was ready for whatever came next.